Hey, this is Liberty Ernie. Today I'm here to share a little trick I used to use when making 2D stages for Super Smash Bros. Brawl. I figured I might as well share this tip with all of you since it'll only be about a decade too late. Back when I first got into Brawl modding, one of the simplest ways to create a custom stage was to make it entirely two-dimensional. Stages in Brawl have 2D collision planes, boundaries, and spawn points, but what you actually see on screen is a 3D model, and before it was possible to import new models into Brawl from apps like Blender or from other video games, a lot of people would take two perfectly flat 3D models like these guys, maybe since they only cost 2,000 gold, and scale them out to fill the whole visible area. One plane would be placed in front of the characters, and the other would be placed behind them. Brawl stores camera information for each stage in the stage's pack file in an STPM entry. Among other things, these parameters control what parts of the stage are or can be visible. The default parameters for Final Destination set the in-game camera's position somewhere between 83 and 1,000 units in front of where the action takes place. This means that the in-game camera never gets closer to the fighters than 83, and never gets farther than 1,000. It also sets the field of view to 30 degrees. These default parameters make sense for a stage like Final Destination that is built around an actual 3D model, but when you're using these parameters on a 2D stage, it's easy to see the gap between the foreground and background plane. Whereas a fully two-dimensional game like Rivals of Aether could combine the layers, Brawl is a 3D game and everything is rendered using 3D polygons, including the fighters. Because the fighters have depth to them, the foreground and background need to be apart a certain distance, so that the fighters don't appear in front of the foreground. But that gap is what causes the separation between the foreground and background that you see here. The quickest solution to this problem is to take advantage of Brawl's pre-existing programming. If you replace either hand and bow or flat zone 2, your characters will be rendered almost completely flat, allowing you to move the planes much closer together. But if you try to do this on any other stage, parts of the fighters will appear in front of what's supposed to be your stage's foreground. And it was still just two stages that you can replace. What if you wanted more than two in your custom Brawl mod? So the approach I eventually took was to adjust the in-game camera's field of view. To see what kind of effect field of view has in a situation like this, you just need to turn on the TV and check out a baseball game. The default angle in almost every professional baseball telecast is the center field camera. This is the angle that shows the pitcher's back and the batter's front, usually with advertisements behind home plate. Although the pitcher is relatively large within the frame, so is the batter. The two players don't seem that far apart, but they're actually about 60 feet apart, the standard distance from the pitcher's mound to home plate. This is because the camera isn't behind the pitcher, it's in center field. In this case, at the Hanwha Eagles home stadium in Daejeon, it's actually about 340 feet, if not a little more, behind the pitcher. Compare this with a view behind home plate. From this camera, you get a view of the action that's much closer to what you would see if you were attending a baseball game in person, standing behind home plate or nearby and close to the action. But Super Smash Bros. Is not baseball, and we don't want the action to look close or far. We just want to flatten everything out as much as we can to make it look two-dimensional. So we do with Brawl's camera what baseball does with the center field camera. Move it way back from 83 units to 500, and zoom way in by decreasing the field of view from 30 degrees to 10. We also keep Brawl from tilting the camera up and down or left and right as it usually does by setting the minimum and maximum tilt to 0 degrees each. The result is that the foreground and the background appear much closer to each other. Everything seems much flatter and comes closer to resembling an actual 2D video game. In fact, none of the 3D models themselves have actually changed. We've only changed the way the game renders them. One final note. If you've decided to make a 2D stage for this 12-year-old 3D video game, you should note that Brawl has separate parameters for the camera when it's paused, and it also has a third set of parameters when fixed camera mode is in use. You can play with a fixed camera from the special Brawl menu, and each stage in Brawl has parameters telling it how to position the camera in this mode. If you're making a 2D stage, you might want to play around with these values, so you can use fixed camera mode with your custom stage. Just be aware of possible differences between the 4x3 and 16x9 modes in Brawl, and how that might affect what portion of your stage is visible.